I'm Pick from Wyoming, USA. Welcome to Call Your Hits, a Storm Riders Airsoft podcast.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. As you heard in the intro, my guest today is Pick, also known as Safed in his local airsoft community in Wyoming. He's been playing airsoft for about 15 years all over the U.S. thanks to his career in the U.S. Air Force, where he's currently a helicopter pilot. Pick is also a very experienced airsoft gun tech and a bit of a gun collector in his own right, as you can sort of see from right behind him. And he's also known as the team dad. He's always prepared to help other players with their airsoft woes, either by lending them gear or even fixing their stuff right on the field. And he's the kind of player that truly encompasses what community spirit means to us. And similar to us, he also plays in a rather small community himself, where games can range from anywhere from 5 to 25 people. So I thought it'd be great to have a chat with him, compare some notes, and most importantly, hear all about why he hasn't used his helicopter background in airsoft yet. So, Pick, welcome to the show, my friend.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Phil. I'm very humbled to be on the show and very grateful to have my sort of hour of fame here. So,
nice. Well,
thanks.
Before we get into it properly, I want to segue into helicopters and airsoft for a second, because I, like many, many other airsofters, I'm sure, have had dreams of getting dropped off to an airsoft game in a helicopter, right? But I think you have some pretty strong opinions on that particular matter of helicopters and airsoft.
Oh, that's completely fair. So, all right, let me preface this a little bit. I have hundreds upon hundreds of hours flying helicopters and employing them in different ways. I have absolutely 0 hours employing them in airsoft games. So I take everything I say with a grain of salt, but I think we can really sort of break it down a little bit here. And I guess root of the question, hey, are helicopters viable in airsoft? And I think that really depends on what you mean by the term viable. Notwithstanding the inherent risk that comes in aviation and whether or not you can convince a private helicopter owner and a private helicopter insurance company, that's the other big sort of thing here, whether or not you can convince them to actually, use their asset for airsoft purposes, notwithstanding. Oh boy, I'm going to piss some people off here with this one. I don't think they're very viable from a mission impact area, and we can talk about that a little bit. However, caveat, there's not a day that I fly that I don't think, wow, this would be awesome. This would be absolutely awesome if, instead of an airborne fire team or a load of ammunition or Casevac in the back, it would be awesome to bring this to the airsoft community for sure. When you have, people in the server and people in the global airsoft community like Glick that can throw money at things, I think it could very much be something that's enjoyable. I could absolutely go into, I've often thought about helicopters broken down. We do one of 3 mission sets, all things said and done, no matter if you're civilian or military, which is air taxi, for lack of a better term. And I'm not trying to piss off any of my rotary wing brethren out there who might be. But what we do, if we're being honest, the big part of it is just being an air taxi for different people. There's C2 ISR, so the reconnaissance side of things. And then the part that everybody loves and that we always see the videos of that online is CAS, close air support, or an attack platform, right? I'd be more than happy to go into each of those and how I think they may or may not actually play into the airsoft world. But if you break it down into those metrics, those might not be the most viable for airsoft. But at the end of the day, you'd still be in a helicopter, which is
and
awesome.
I think for a lot of stuff that we do in airsoft in general, is it really super, do we do it the most useful way possible, or do sometimes we just do stuff that is, we spend a lot of money on it, but it's not really doing what we need? Night vision, for example, is a different conversation. You spend a lot of money on it, but you get something that you cannot replicate any other way.
Absolutely.
you just can't. And that's also kind of true with the helicopter, except that the order of magnitude of expense, and also you mentioned a good point about insurance. Like there's an inherent risk involved with that. So the idea of being like, oh man, I'd love to get dropped off at an airsoft game with my squad, and it's like, have you ever flown in a helicopter before? Like, do you know anything about, like, I think about here where we live, there's a lot of offshore oil and they use helicopters for ferrying people out to the rigs and stuff. Before you can even get on that helicopter, you have to go through all kinds of training so that they feel safe putting you in that helicopter in the first place. So I can only imagine, in the context of airsoft, putting a random bunch of people into a bird that you are responsible for as a pilot or as an insurance company or whatever. It's kind of like, yeah, probably not gonna, pardon the expression, it's probably not gonna fly, right?
Yeah.
Or you're gonna have to throw a lot of money at this problem.
So sure. I mean, let's break it down a little bit. So roughly speaking, the cost to fly an average plain Jane fixed wing 152 or 172 is probably around around $120 to $150 an hour, give or take. There's certainly some flight schools that will let you borrow their aircraft for significantly more money than that, and you can probably talk to some old men at Class G airports that'll let you fly their plane for less than that. Helicopters on average are about 3 times more expensive than to their equivalent fixed wing counterparts. And that's simply because maintenance is a lot higher, fuel cost is a lot higher, because helicopters are so much more inefficient than fixed wing ever is. And then also the side of things of like, hey, it's the amount of weight you're picking up too. Helicopters and aviation in general thinks of things in weight a lot more than you might anticipate otherwise. So like a good example of this is like there's for example, Cal Fire in California that are flying for fire attack there. They're flying things like sky cranes. They're flying some like medium, light to medium helicopters like Firehawks 60s that have been outfitted for fire. They're flying 212s and 412s, which are essentially Hueys, either 2-bladed or 4-bladed. And even just those, like those medium, that medium helicopter, medium weight, is about $4,000 a flight hour. Once you factor in maintenance, once you factor in fuel per hour. Okay, now if you look into what those birds can carry, I'm really projecting here because my experience with that, I know military helicopters. I don't know GA and fire attack as well as I probably should. But anywhere probably between like 2 and 8 people in one of those. So you start looking to what you would have to charge. Okay, great. Now, for those of you in the audience, and I can't see you obviously, but raise your hand if you've rappelled before. Okay, probably I would wager 20%. 20% of our audience just put their hands up. Awesome. How many of you have rappelled out of a helicopter? Perfect. How many of you have fast roped out of a helicopter? Awesome. Very, very few, all things said and done. And the amount of injuries, I'm sure, Phil, you've heard the injuries and whatnot that come out of things like airborne school, from simply people that are parachuting, which I would wager a lot more people are probably parachuting on their own in the civilian side than people who are fast roping out of helicopters on the civilian side. So the injury rate's probably going to be pretty high. So your insurance company is also going to have to carry liability and that sort of thing. And that's on top of if the insurance company would even allow you, or if your helicopter is FAA certified for fast rope, which I don't think there's many civilian helicopters that are certified for that. So
I can't imagine. Yeah.
The advantage of a helicopter is that with enough power, you can land almost anywhere, you can hover almost anywhere, and you could probably infill people wherever you want. I would absolutely love to go to an airsoft event and step off the ramp of a CH-47 and be in the shit. But when you factor in things like tag-in rounds, the magic BB that makes it into the tail rotor somehow, people just being people. For example, you've played AMS events, and I'm sure you've read the tax op for what vehicle use at their events looks like. Mm-hmm. Most people have a lot of experience driving cars, and yet they still limit it to anytime you want to back up, you need a spotter. Anytime you're moving on the field, it's 25 miles an hour and it's limited to roads. Now add in that added risk of aviation and oh boy, it's pretty bad.
Yeah, so safe to say that helicopters. I mean, and I know that some games offer them, right? And
Absolutely.
it's not very common because of all the stuff you just mentioned.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's definitely, I think, for most of us, I would say, except for those few of us who actually fly them for a living, it's definitely sort of a bit of a pipe dream, right? Like, yeah.
That's fair. However, if this is for like the listener base, if you ever have the opportunity and you're waffling on whether or not to do it, absolutely do it. Just,
Mm-hmm.
just that's going to be a very, very memorable experience for you, airsoft wise. And talking about air assault, CAS and ISR, the things that I talked about earlier. Sure, ISR that can be achieved with most modern drones, and we can talk about drones ad nauseum too. Know a fair amount about that topic. But air assault and CAS, if you get the opportunity to hang off the side of a Robinson R44 on a gunner's belt or a PRL, take it, please.
Mm-hmm.
Spend the money and take it. You won't
Yeah.
regret it.
Yeah, I know when we were initially talking about going to an event in the States last year, Johnny and I, we were talking like whatever. And this sort of applies not just to helicopters, but just in general. We were like, any bolt-ons that they have for the ticket, you should probably take those because it's an experience that, I mean, in our case, like they're limited for night vision and stuff like that, but whatever. Like, but if you can do, we both said if there's a helicopter bolt-on, we're taking it because like when else are you going to get that opportunity, right? But
Agree.
yeah, so I wanted to get into it for real now. I'm glad that we had this little tangent, but I wanted to get to the meat of what we wanted to talk about to you about today. And I think I mentioned in the intro, you've been playing airsoft for like 15 years, and as a result of your career in the military, you've had an opportunity to move around and play in the U.S. in a lot of different places.
Absolutely.
And for a lot of our listeners who aren't in the US, like the US is a very big place, right? And so it's funny. I was talking to someone who I know who's in North Carolina and they're moving to Indiana.
Mhm.
And I said, "Oh, are you driving?" And he's like, "Yeah, it's about 10 hours." And I was like, "Yeah, it's so funny. Like in 10 hours, you're driving through 5 states. In 10 hours for me, I'm not even leaving the island I live on, right?
Yeah.
But that's another, but in like Europe, 10 hours, you're in like, how many countries did you go through, right? So the US is a really, really big country. And so I guess as a consequence of that, the different places that you might have lived and played airsoft in would likely be pretty different, right? So I'm curious to get into that, but how did airsoft start for you initially? And like, how does where you play now compare to where you started playing airsoft?
So let's see. Back when I was a wee young lad, all however many years ago, my airsoft experience actually started out with probably the way a lot of other people's airsoft experience, might have started. My parents got me a little, plinkable M9 for Christmas, and I fell in love with that. And then a bunch of neighborhood kids and I got together and we're like, we all have a bunch of these. Let's shoot each other with them. Why not?
Mm-hmm.
For safety purposes, always wear your eye pro if you're going to go out and do that. Don't start the way we did, which was safety squints. Terrible idea.
Yeah.
And the fact that I still have these two, miracle in and of itself. But then I started getting more seriously into it. My high school at the time had, I don't know if you would call it a club or a team or just a group of dudes that we all kind of had the same interests. We also had a lot of the same interests, like military wise. All had family that had served. So we kind of had this fascination with it. And they were the ones that kind of got me into it. Given this was back in the days when like lipos were new to the scene and MOSFETs, what's that? Oh, maybe the expert tech wizard over there has one because he or she made it themselves, right? My start, however, with that was in Ohio. And I'm sure that there's probably some of my Airsoft Ohio brethren out there that recognize the face or whatnot. Shout out, hey guys, what's up? However, Airsoft Ohio back in the forum days, 14 years ago at this point, was absolutely incredible. Moving a bunch of different places in the United States has shown me that going to different communities is a lot like changing your glasses prescription, that it's not necessarily better or worse, but it's different and it shows you things you didn't see before. Now, what I
Mm.
mean by that is, for example, Southwest Ohio area, back when I was really cutting my teeth in airsoft, we had a 400-acre field called Hidden Spring Ranch or something along those lines. Excellent pulled pork sandwiches. If you know, you know. But 400-acre field that routinely got like 50 to 100 people on an open play. Unheard of. I would love to go to a field in the part of the country where I am now and show up and there'd be 100 players. Like, that's why I go to big events when I can manage it with my work schedule.
Hmm.
But what it really opened my eyes to, especially when I was, young STEM engineering kid that really wanted to work on stuff. Hey, when I opened up the gearbox of my GMP M4, that is not in the lineup back there, but should be because it's stuck with me all these years. And I couldn't figure out how to get it back together. The amount of people that I could just talk to and be like, hey, this is happening. I don't know how to fix it. They were like, oh, yeah, dumbass. You're using a LiPo and you haven't put a MOSFET in. Therefore, your trigger contacts are fried. Do this, it'll fix it. And that's how I really got my start in gun teching. And that, I think if I wasn't a tech, I wouldn't still be playing today simply because of the way the communities that you go through change. So long
Hmm.
story short, got the start in Ohio, had a huge community that made me feel extremely welcome at the time. A lot of those people have probably moved on from airsoft, but I mean, I'd still absolutely shake any one of their hands and say thank you for making uh, airsoft into what it is today. Uh, so
Yeah. And
that's
so
that's the way it
when
goes.
you, yeah, and I mean that's a really interesting perspective because not many people I would say who listen. I mean, most people would probably, you're in your community or you have a couple of fields that you play in and you have your multiple communities, but you don't get to experience all these different communities for real. Like even for us, like on the Discord, we get to talk to a lot of
Sure.
people and that's
Yeah.
awesome. But I'm not living your airsoft community in the same way. And like you said, it's really interesting. Your perspective shifts, right? Like you don't know what you don't know in many
Yeah.
cases when you're in there, and it's only once you leave that you sort of realize what you left behind. It's like that quote from The Office, like I wish there was a way to know that I was in the good old days while I'm already in them, right?
Every day of
So
my life.
right, like, and it's interesting because now you went from that like huge 400-acre situation, hundreds of players, to now I don't know what size your field is, but we talked in the intro about how the community is much smaller now, right?
Yeah.
So how does that, having that smaller community compare to the sense of community that you had in the larger area?
Um, so again, I'd reiterate that there are probably some things that I will say that I prefer, but whether or not it's better or worse is dependent. Mileage may vary, user experience may vary. So, um, I mean, the community that I'm in now is absolutely phenomenal. There's something to say for when you're kind of in your small little community, you are all that you've got. So the experience that you curate is very, very much your own in different ways. In fact, so all said and done, in my 7 years of being active duty so far, I've moved 6 times, which is more than normal for a military career, simply because of the path that I took to get through pilot training and some of the stuff COVID happened during all of that too. So that just complicated the solution. So played in a lot of different spaces, and I will say that probably the one that I'm in right now has been my favorite since the Airsoft Ohio days. Right now, we have around that 5 to 25 number that routinely show up. We have gotten, I think, as many as 35 before, but that was like us, making a big deal out of it. It was like the we have one sort of I'm not going to like name names or anything, but like we have one guy who's been here since I've like long before I ever got to this duty station, who's been organizing and running everything, and he does an incredible job of it. Those of you who might have been at like 1861, you might know him as Crash. He is phenomenal team lead, organizer, whatever you want to call him. And a lot of the times, what I've seen is that the organizers, like the people that love airsoft so much that they want to curate an experience for somebody else, you remind me of that first and foremost, is the fact that you want to grow the community in such a way that you're willing to organize this sort of thing. That is what really, really keeps a community together, and really sort of keeps everybody coming back for more. Sometimes some things can get repetitive. There's only so many team death matches you can play. There's only so many tweaks to the rules that you can necessarily make. At the end of the day, though, as long as you if you enjoy hanging out with those people, as long as they're good people, I'll keep coming back for years. And I'm going to be extremely sad when I leave this particular duty station to go on to my next one, because I'm going to be leaving this crew behind, and they're great.
Yeah. What is your favorite part when you think about your crew that you're in? I think about like what you were talking about with, or we were saying at the start about being the team dad, right? And
Sure.
being there, like, what is the thing that really is the most memorable, like specifically that makes you smile, like when you hit the airsoft field and you could only get in that small community?
Oh boy. Man, we're facing the music now with that question. I mean, I over the airsoft years and all the different communities that I've seen, the experiences that really stick with you are the ones that kind of spread on and off the field. And I know that's kind of hard to quantify, but hang with me for a second. Like almost anyone in my current crew, the current group that I play with, I would guarantee you that if they called me up right now, said, "Hey, Pick, I've got a flat. This is where I'm at. I'm kind of in your neck of the woods," I would be like, "Hey, yep. What tools do you need? And do I need to bring a trailer?" And that sort of community, like sometimes it's hard to find. Sometimes it's hard to find people that you just kind of click with, that you want to keep with for a while, which is simply unfortunate. However, like most memorable side of things is like it's I don't know. It's when the group that you are in both makes you feel included, and you see parts of what you're doing to influence that community, feel grateful that you're around, and also feel that you are the one that have included them. I think I sent it to you in like my sort of intro, like so many times, in a lot of different communities that I've been a part of. I am not against grabbing any of the guns back there or that M14 over there and going, "Hey, use this. Give me your gun. I'm going to fix it real quick." And I go back, break out the folding table, break out the big Klein Tools precision tool set, crack the thing open, and 30 minutes later, I've got a new piston in it. It's running flawlessly, maybe a new shim job while we're at it. And it's like, here you go. Here's your gun back. Rock and roll with it. That's just the most memorable thing. That is the coolest thing, when it's like everything comes together. You get somebody back in the fight. You get somebody playing again. And they're like, "Hey, what do I owe you?" I'm like, "Nothing, dude. Like, keep coming back.
Yeah.
You can pay me back. Keep coming back. Play more airsoft. Sling some more plastic. Make a friend," right?
And there's something, I guess, really special about being able to, and you mentioned this a little bit, but like see sort of the, for lack of a better term, like the fruits of your labor,
Sure,
right?
yeah.
In that later on down the road, that person is still playing. Or conversely, your community now has a reflex to be like, "Don't worry, Pick's got you."
Sure. Yeah,
right?
100%.
Having that reputation. And they know, I think this is something for my money. And I know it's, this is about you, but like take a sip of your drink. Like, I think for me, there's a huge part of these small communities. Like everybody knows everybody.
Yes.
Right. And I think it's hard to put money on that. Right.
100%. Absolutely agree. The fact that everybody knows everybody, and it's funny. The individual that I was talking about, the field organizer, like I said, we'll call him Crash because that's what he goes by at bigger events. But the number of times where I've been like, "Hey, so-and-so is putting on an event or is trying to organize this event down south, like in the Denver or Colorado Springs area." And he just goes, "Oh yeah, I know this person. I have their number in my phone. Like, here, let me text them for you or whatnot." And I'm like, "Huh?" I know you.
Yeah.
Reaching out to
And I
the
think,
bigger community at least.
yeah, definitely. And I think, you build that reputation, especially for, I know, like, I think about, Matt Kruger, Big Red, right? Like people in Colorado, like they know who he is. It doesn't just not in his own community as well. But I think a lot of smaller community players yearn for these larger communities, right? You very much like, you're like, oh, we only have 10 players, 12 players. That's not good enough, right? That's
Sure.
not like, I'll never be able to, these are real senses that I've felt over the years. It's like, I'll never be able to go to an AMS game with 400 people and compete if I've never played a game with more than like 30 players, right? Like it's not good enough. I can't get ready, and my airsoft is somehow inferior to these larger games of airsoft. What do you think some of these players in these smaller communities are missing about their sort of their reasoning about how they feel about their own airsoft?
So that's fair. What I'll note for example from playing in a larger community in the past, it's very easy to get lost in the flow of things. Biggest example of that is when you're in an open play, when it's 50 tan versus 50 green, and the only way you tell each other apart is the color of the uniform, like a lot of big Milsim events, by the way. It's very easy to just be kind of a member of the sort of rank and file, for lack of a better term. Whereas when you're really in that smaller community, you could show up and you could forget your batteries, and there's probably at least 2 or 3 people that are chomping at the bit to hand you a lipo and go, "Yep, here, get it back to me when you can get it. I know where you live. Like, let me get it back to you."
Yeah.
However, on the flip side of things that you're really missing from the bigger events, to bring ourselves full circle, is a lot of the things that you're not going to see in daily games. Things like your vehicles, things like your pyro, given we could have the conversation on whether or not pyro is worth it. And I know that we talked about it on this or that episode, or maybe 3 or 4 episodes ago. Regardless, you might be missing some of that. You're probably missing some of your bigger, kind of cooler, more awesome terrain. You're probably missing exposure to some airsoft advancements that you might have not have otherwise seen. There was a community that I played with that didn't know what a DSG was. Like, they was so isolated, and it was one of those like, wow, we've never had anybody that could open a gearbox. As I, with a folding table from Costco, like ripped an M4 apart, brought, completely opened it up, all to the point that I could swap a piston out. And I'm obviously not talking bad of any of those communities, because sometimes you don't know what you don't know.
Definitely.
But yeah, you are kind of sometimes missing those bigger, like, once, maybe not once in a lifetime, but once in a decade, once in 5 years experiences that you might not have otherwise gotten. I feel like with a lot of airsofters that go to event after event after event, you go, oh, Guardian Center. How many times have I been to Guardian Center in the past 5 years? But to someone who's never played a big event before in Montana or Iowa or Nebraska, that's probably huge. Maybe not Nebraska, because D-Day is pretty close to that. But regardless, like,
right,
if you're never going to at least 1 or 2 of those big events to see, like, hey, what color is the grass? It might not be greener, but it's still grass. Sure, like, go do it.
Yeah, and there's sort of like, and I mean, I'm one of those people, like you mentioned, small communities in Montana, Nebraska, St. John's, Newfoundland, right? Like same exact situation. I think one of the things that I discovered very quickly is, I mean, yes, I've been playing airsoft for a very long time, but I've never played airsoft in these larger games before. So when I go to one of these big events, the natural reflex is to be like, well, the airsoft that I've played in my time playing is not good enough to prepare me for the level of play that the players are going to be at this event. And in my experience, that was just patently incorrect. Because in point of fact, in smaller communities, and I'd love to hear your experience of that, you can't get just swept up with the rank and file. You need every person to be contributing, which means you likely will end up doing, quote unquote, more work than at other games where you can just sort of sit there, because every player is required, right?
Absolutely.
Because there's only 12 of you, as opposed to 100 or whatever.
There's a team friend of mine that I had since I started airsoft 15 years ago. He's in the Airsoft Ohio server. I'm not going to name him by name, but he knows who he is. Who at the end of the day said, "Dude, like, you're scared of going to Milsim West. At the end of the day, they're just airsofters. They are the same as you, and probably." And he told me this. He's like, hey, you're probably going to be pretty cool to them and probably going to have an interesting experience because of your actual Air Force background. Which, hey, cool. That's neither here nor there. And honestly, I think that everybody's life experience is unique and interesting and has a cool perspective in its own way, bar none. However, what you said is absolutely a true thing. If you're doing, if it's only 12 of you and it's a 6-on-6, all of a sudden, if one person's gun goes down and one person isn't contributing, it's a 4-on-6 gunfight. And a 4-on-6 gunfight is a pretty hard gunfight. And I never boasted being good. I'm not a good airsoft.
Mm-hmm.
I just like playing. So, it's making everybody come back. Not making, but encouraging people to come back, encouraging people to bring their ideas. No question is a stupid question, sort of thing. Hey, what if we limited everybody to one mag for this event or for this next game? What if?
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. Like, have you taken some of your experiences from these larger, or how have you taken some of these experiences from your larger games and brought them back to your smaller community and said, like, let's try, and obviously you can't replicate all of it because it's, the limitations of, I get it, but like you're not flying helicopters, etc. What have you tried to bring back and how have you tried to implement that? And what's worked and what's been like catastrophic?
Oh boy. I mean, the up and the downside of it is that at most bigger events, the thing that you have that's different is just the economy of scale, right? What might work for a 50-on-50 doesn't necessarily work for a 6-on-6. However, and I think eHouse on Gun Gamers has a pretty similar take on this to what I do. But like, if you have a limitation, make that a rule and make that fun. Start taking your little teeny tiny rules that you have for granted and just start tweaking them. Have fun. The mag thing that I talked about. He talks about at one point there was one Milsim West game where they had somebody just literally didn't order BBs, so the only thing they had was the backlog that they had from the event before, and they're like, "Congratulations, you now have an ammo shortage." And it's like, "Whoa, that works." Experiment with the field a little bit. Oh shoot, so we have a field that's longer than it is wide. Oh shit, why do you have to play from here to here? Why can't you play from here to here? See what happens. I mean, there's a million different game modes out there that you can potentially go and play, and bring something that you want to work on. One of the things that we use in like the flying community, I mean, everything gets briefed and debriefed ad nauseum. But when you come to a brief, you always bring what's called desired learning objectives. Hey, what do I want to get away from this flight? Whether it's operational or simply a training mission, what do I want to take away from this? Bring those to your organizer. Hey, what do I want to get out of the day? Hey, like Matt always talks about, the Airsoft Challenge program. What if we incorporated part of that into what we do? What if we, I don't know, like here with my local community, the only place we have to play on is mostly BLM land, Bureau of Land Management. One place is part of a national forest that's near us that we can play in during, there's a certain season that's allowed for shooting, and they classify airsoft as shooting. That we can play on there. It's very woods bally, but lots of rolling terrain, and we're also up at like 9,000 feet. So,
wow,
you get winded quick. You get winded very quick. The other place we play is an abandoned hydropower plant. Not huge, warehouse or anything like that. It's mostly still woods ball, mostly still outdoors. But like, hey, maybe the thing I want to work on and learn today is like land nav. What if I want to? I've got a plotter somewhere around here, but what if I want to learn a little bit about MGRS today? What if I want to learn a little bit about small force on bigger force? What if I want to learn about like a recon by fire thing? What if I want to learn about peeling and breaking contact a lot today? Even though it's 6-on-6 or 12, screw it. Make it 8-on-4 and give the 4 something that they can tangibly make it 2. That's how you get people coming back and like changing up the rules, variety. And also, this is the shameless, plug for all you techs out there. Let other people use your stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Show them like, hey, maybe the one of my first airsoft guns was a Crossman Pulsar 72, if you know what that is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and like the thing that opened my eyes was when some guy handed me a G&G combat machine. And I was like, oh, this is what airsoft is. And
Yeah.
the same thing happens when you hand people your $500 replica. Like they could break
Yeah.
it, but they're probably not going to.
Yes. Well, and exactly like the risk, especially if you're a good, a good tech, like, I mean, the risk is so low, right? But the potential benefit from it is so much bigger than the risk. I love the idea of like the learning objectives. Like, I think that's such an important critical concept. And I think I know for sure for me, but sort of people do this sort of naturally in some way. You're like, what am I going to try and get out of today? For some people, it's just I want to play airsoft and I want to have fun. I mean, in the last podcast that Pat and I did, which at time of recording you haven't heard it yet, but like we talk a lot about what we think like ethical airsoft is about and how people should morally behave or ought to think about how they should morally behave. But that doesn't mean that everyone is going to feel that way, right? And that's fine. If that's not you, and that's okay. But I think what you're talking about, desired learning objectives, I think is such a really critical concept for those of us who are trying to get the most out of airsoft in general, whether or not your community is large or small. It's just, I think that's one of the sort of like things that maybe people take for granted from smaller communities is you have that flexibility and that opportunity to do literally what you want, right? And make that exactly like I know scenarios that we've done in our smaller groups where it's like, hey, I want to try this cool thing and it's cool. And then, we gave the benefit of that for like 2 other people. Well, when it's done, guess what? We're rotating and 2 other people get to do it. And the other people, like are the demo soldiers or whatever. Right. So yeah, it's a really good suggestion, I think.
Yeah. At the end of the day, you still turn and burn, you still change the sides of the field, you still go and sling some more plastic. In my local community, sometimes one of the hardest things to get people to do, and this is, again, if people from my local community are watching this, I apologize, is literally just getting people to reload mags, reload their gas mags, and get back out in the field. Because sometimes the reset time is like half an hour.
Oh, dude. Oh, yeah. 100%. Yeah, I feel you. Yeah.
It's like, I'm sure, the older and older that you get, the less and less time you have for the things that you really enjoy and the things that you love. I don't even have kids yet, and I'm already finding that's happening. I'm sure Matt can chime in a little bit more than I can on that one, but it's harder and harder to find times for things that you love. Pat often talks about it in the podcast. I know that like it's hard to find time to do airsoft. And sometimes that is an hour a week teching on a gun. Sometimes that is, turning down something else in order so that you can go and play airsoft on the weekends, which is fine. Like you have to budget your time. We're only given a certain amount of time on this earth, so you might as well use it for what you want to use it for.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you might as well maximize the time that you're actually out in the airsoft field for. You might as well curate the experience that you want to have. When I was up in Montana on my last duty assignment, like we had a period of time where our local field got closed down because of some city ordinance stuff. We fought our hearts out to get the field and the section that we had back. But in the meantime, I was like, well, shoot, I can't do anything about this community right now. But I do know a community that's 3 hours away in another state. Montana doesn't have a whole lot of stuff in it, but I do know this community over here 1 weekend a month during the summer. And your summers are even shorter than ours are with the winter and everything. Stuff takes time to thaw out. However, 1 week into summer, I drove my happy ass down there 3 hours to go to the CQB field to curate the community there and build it there. It's like your community is what you make of it. So get out there.
Yeah, I take your point. It drives me crazy, and I know like at our field, like it can be, we're really trying to push the refs to like let's get games going. Yeah. It's like even if people aren't ready, well, guess what? They sit out and we'll just do a game 10 minutes later or whatever. Like let's get back out there. So I think you're not alone. Yeah, I know it's frustrating, but like I think it's I mean airsofters, man, like
airsofters,
right?
But there's ways around that. Those ammo cans that you see up there, 2 of them right now. Shout out to Fishy Airsoft Creations for putting out both the code and all of the STL files for like 3D printed speed loaders that you can put in one of those cans that hold like 4,000 BBs in them that you just press a mag in and it loads a 200 round mag in 15
Nice.
seconds. It's like, you have no excuse to not reload quickly. I'm providing the loader. Go.
Yeah. And I mean, Odins are still stupid fast too. Like I remember for years I was just sort of like clicking until Matt was like, Phil, why don't you have an Odin? And I was like, I don't know. And he's like, I'm sending you some money, buy an Odin on me. Like that's literally the conversation.
100%.
Right. So
I gotta give a huge shout out, and this wasn't in the frame, but Wish Tech Airsoft. He is in the Flathead Valley of Montana, like Kalispell area. Same sort of thing. It was like, dude, why aren't you running an Odin? Like, welcome to the 21st century of airsoft. Stop using the pistol loaders, and here's so yeah, I own like 2 or 3 Odins from him now, and he also supplies almost all of my tech parts. James, I know you're probably watching this because I turned on the podcast like a week ago. Thanks, bud.
Nice. So listen, for our last segment, I want to do something that was actually the idea for getting you on the podcast in the first place, a segment that we're calling Take Your Pick, right? Inspired by this or that. So I've got a couple of different scenarios for you that I'd like you to take your pick at and talk a little bit about why you prefer that the answer compared to the other one.
I would love to.
I'm going to ease you into it. Don't worry about it.
We're here to face the beat.
So here's the first one. Would you rather 300 BB ammo cap in 10 low caps or 1 high cap?
Ooh, low cap.
Yeah,
that's easy. That's a knee-jerk reaction right there. There's 2 reasons for that. First and foremost, I think it was you that said, hey, don't come to the field with a $1,000 rifle, but a 10-cent ready up. And ready ups, very, very basic drill. For those of you on the podcast, if you're not doing them, do them. But also in with ready up comes be a nerd, go in your basement, put your gear on, and reload your damn replica. See what happens. Take a knee, reload it from a knee, go prone, reload from prone. Like, do that. I would personally rather that with the real caps and whatnot. There is the sort of side of thing. The other side, the second thing is like there's an immersion factor to it. Sure. I'm more about curating the experience rather than the whole immersion things, even though they go hand in hand. It's weird. I can't. However, for example, the Scar H back there is one of the TM NGRS ones. If you run one of those, the mags are not exactly cheap. They're $30 a pop. You could probably get them cheaper somewhere, but they're not exactly cheap. So I only run 6 of them, and they're only 90 round mags, which compared to the world of modern M4 high caps is a weirdly low amount comparatively.
Yeah.
However, growing up in airsoft, I got a stinking deal on the old school Star mags, like the 80.
Oh yes, absolutely. Let's go.
Yeah. So I got like a box of 10 of them for like $30, dude. Like it was stupid cheap at the time. I still have a few of them, but very, very strong springs, very, very good mags for what they are. And I ran them for a while until somebody like at one point tossed me a mag, like a 130, MAG mag. And I was like, oh, these hold more. And, so that's not a big thing. Whereas the high cap is like, I don't know.
Yeah. Fair enough.
Why not have some more fun and reload every now and then?
Yep. Legit. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Second one. This is more of a tech one for you. Sure. Would you rather a short barrel replica with an R-hop or a long tight bore barrel replica with a regular hop up?
Okay, caveat this question. With a regular hop-up, is that a regular hop-up that I can shim and put my own bucking in? Or is that a completely bone stock hop with a tight board?
Like a regular, like not a flat hop or anything like that, just a standard. yeah, like a stock, I guess.
Okay, 15 years ago, I would have easily taken the R hop because that was like 3 or 4 years in was when R hops really started coming onto the scene, in my opinion, and they really started becoming good. However, you had to tune them a lot to get them to work. However, I saw really good results out of short little 300 millimeter, like, well, I call 300 millimeters short, but short barrels. Um, you saw really good results out of those compared to the hops of the time. Nowadays, you have so many good stock hop ups that still use like round style nubs that honestly work pretty well. I mean, aside from the spur gear coming apart, that M110A1 right there that I built for my wife performed pretty good. I did nothing to the hop up in it, and I mean it was doing pretty good. It's not as accurate as that M14, the Shughart build right there, but I don't expect it to be because that's got about 4 hours just into the hop up alone, and that one I pulled out of the box and stopped the mag in, and it was good to go. So modern hop ups, I'd take the longer barrel over the R hop.
All right. What about either playing on a huge field with no option for any CQB,
Okay.
focused all on woodland movement, or a tiny field that's only CQB?
Ooh, oh, that's a good question. So I've played both. I've definitely played both. My own personal take on this is the bigger field with no option for CQB, just woods ball.
Yeah.
Primarily, that's because my experience is mostly in woods ball. And like I said, I don't claim to be a good airsofter. I just like playing. I've played a lot, but I don't claim to be good. So I like that. And also, typically woods ball, as you can see by the longer barreled guns behind me, my builds tend to lean more towards the longer barrel, more consistent side of things. However, I've been outranged before. Actually, Big Red, we were talking about him earlier, Matt Kruger. At 1861, wherever my 240 is, it's over there somewhere. I was really, really proud of that build, like 550 millimeter in a barrel. It was ranged incredibly. Even on the Spectre side, I had a dope book on what ranges worked for when. And I couldn't outrange Big Red with his HPA. He had, it's something with an inner barrel that was about that long. So, maybe I'm not as good of a tech as I think I am, but, that's typically where my builds shine. And also, I like just being able to move a little bit more. I like the space. I like being able to use things. I like CQB uses more of your like fast twitch brain. Woods ball uses more of your strategic brain.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And don't feel too bad about being outclassed by Matt Kruger. Like, you're comparing yourself to like Usain Bolt, right? Like, it's not a fair comparison.
That's fair, but also if I'm gonna huck a 240 around a field the size of 1861 for a solid 18 hours, I really like to have the range to be able to outrange him. But you
should get him to take a crack at it and see what he can do for you.
That's fair.
Yeah. So going in the same vein, would you rather run a sub 1 joule replica or a 2+ joule like DMR bolt gun situation?
That's a good question. Personally, I'd also still take the +2 joule situation with the MED, primarily because tyranny of distance is a thing. It's very nice to be able to reach out and touch someone who can't necessarily touch you. Other side of things with that is, recently my wife and I started playing. That's why I built that 110 for her. She's also a helicopter pilot, qualified on the 110A1 because she's been working with our airborne fire teams and been doing some really cool shit. And as much as I would love to build a sub 1 joule gun, which I do have in an MP5 somewhere over there, I just would like to be able to play with her. And in order to be able to reach out and touch at the ranges that she can, I'd run the +2 joule anytime. Same with Nielsen West Tax Hop. Running a 249, and I'm not talking featherweight 249s, I'm talking like middleweight and heavyweight 249s that weigh closer to the real thing. I would much rather run my 240B and muscle that thing around the field for 40 hours at a time than run 249. I don't play airsoft for functionality. I play it for vanity because dramatic, and I'm a huge D&D nerd, so might as well.
Fair enough. All right, I got 2 more for you.
Hit me.
This one I think is particularly heinous, but we'll see. So you're playing, and there's one of these 2 rules have to apply. Either you cannot stop moving for more than 5 seconds at a time, or you always have to stay in the same spot for at a minimum of 5 minutes.
Oh, this one's pretty similar to the one that you asked Glick and Matt. And I would very easily take the one that you move more often. Even if I'm running like a 240, like an HMG roll, or not HMG, MMG roll, would absolutely take that. And the real reason for that is they always talk about military side of things is that having the initiative is such a force multiplier. Being able to make who you're fighting against think about what you're doing rather than you staying in one spot, that's an advantage in and of itself. And as much as I don't want to be like, oh, military tactics useful for airsoft, because they're not. They are, but they aren't. There's some distinction there. There's some nuance there, right? But being able to seize the initiative, do something about it, and make your adversary think about what you are doing, huge. Yeah, I would absolutely take that. Even if I have to pick up the 240 every 5 seconds and move with it, I will absolutely take that. Can't run and gun, but like at 1861, me and I actually don't know what his tack name would be, so I'm not going to name him out. But my AG, we ran an AG for it. Him, whenever I got set up in a position and started just laying hate, and he would always call, "Hey, bro, tunnel vision, shift right," or "Hey, gun target line, 10 degrees left." Huge. And he would always be calling out the next piece of cover that we were going to move to, which was huge. Absolutely huge. And I would love to get like Glick's opinion on this, since he runs MG probably more than I do. But just being able to go, oh shit, we're going, 30 yards, that fork tree over there. Sweet. Awesome. Moving. And just get ready to go. So being able to move, and also given, I think your cardio is a little bit better than mine, being an ultra marathon runner, but I've rucked a marathon myself. I've done a lot of races myself, and being able to take advantage of my sort of earned cardio ability would also be a good thing in that.
100%. And just as a tangent, I think that's so true. Like, you have all these skills that, not just us, but everyone has skills that they build in their regular life doing all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
And if it can translate to airsoft, you absolutely should take advantage of it. You worked on those, right? So with the cardio, definitely my cardio is not as good as yours, especially right now, because I've been dealing with an injury regardless.
I disagree.
Absolutely. I want to leverage that because I know I can do it. It's like, you need me to run over there? Yeah, I got you. Don't worry about it, right? But the scenario you were talking about with your AG telling you like, hey, shift fire, like that's a dream scenario for me, because I find at any airsoft game where I'm head empty, that's where I'm just like, I'm living.
I'll tell you
right?
what.
If I have to think about what I'm doing, I'm getting in trouble. It's horrible.
I'll tell you what, Phil. Next milsim that you and I are both at, you run AG, I'll be your AG.
All right. That sounds like a plan to me. Okay. Last question of the day. And it's an old standby. Take your pick. No sling or 3-point sling?
Oh boy. So listening to the last episode, I know that Matt would take the 3-point sling approach because he's had experience with the 3-point sling. I'm just a stick jockey, and I've only, flown. The amount of times I've actually been hands-on with a weapon, or hands-on with a firearm for the purposes of my job, is extremely minimal, significantly less than Matt's. However, I would personally side with Glick on this one. For 1861, I ran a real 240B sling, and with the right setup that I had for my H harness and where I put all the bags and whatnot, which another shout out to Kiwi Milsim for the box mags that he put together for me for that event. We can go off on a tangent as far as how good Kiwi Milsim is and how much he hooked me up over there. But it was not that big of a deal to not have a sling on the 240 for that entire event. The only times when I really wanted it is the times when we were doing like a full body push, when we were doing like full wedge formation. And I was, in one of the back rights of them. And it was like, okay, like you kind of had to have the gun up, but you were still kind of low ready. But low ready with the 240 is more like, it's just leaning over you. And that would have sucked. But for traversing most of that field, which given, like, I think point to point from fob to fob was still only like 0.8 of a click. Not the biggest field in the world, but with some of the terrain they had there, it was different. I just had my kit set up in such a way that if I knew I was hucking at a good distance, box mag off, throw it in a pouch, 240 over the shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
It worked. It wasn't a problem. Weirdly enough, if I was running the 110, if I was running the Scar H or any of the other lighter guns back there, I'd probably take the 3-point.
All right. So Team No Sling for the 240 Bravo, and then 3-point for the rest of it. Fair enough.
So the lighter guns, it's weird because you're probably going to be doing a lot of other things, whereas the 240, it's bipod to bipod. Like, that's it.
Fair enough.
Of course.
Well, listen, Pick, thank you so much for joining me today. It was a great conversation.
Before I go,
yeah,
I have a question for you. It's not necessarily the this or that, or take your pick or anything like that. But I do want to get your opinion, because I think even though I've been in a lot of different communities and whatnot, I've been in airsoft for a long time. I think you've got a unique perspective compared to what I do, and I like to ask this question to people a lot. So, like,
sure,
in airsoft, both whether it can be in your own circle, globally, or whatnot, what is the next big thing? Back 15 years ago, lipos were the next big thing. 10 years ago, that was MOSFETs. I would wager probably about 7 or 8 years ago, it was HPA when it was really coming onto the scene. What's next?
Okay, that's a good question. I think for us in the community that we are in specifically, when it comes to kit, it's the Flamingo grenades.
Oh, I agree. 100%.
Both their hand grenades, but also their launchables, and specifically the launchables.
Sure.
Like, I think in the US, we've talked a lot about pyro in the US and stuff in the past. You really have taken tag in and those products, and like they're baked into a lot of your events. Here, they're almost unheard of.
Oh, really?
One, because those that were available here are extremely expensive. And most of the other ones, is like the pyro exploding ones, were just not available.
That's fair.
Right. Now, with the Flamingo grenades and their launchables, you now have a product that is commercially available. Like, you can get one of the 40 Max plates with their tube and the shells to put, like, for under $100 Canadian.
Whoa.
Right?
Okay. Yeah.
Now, does it have the range of a CO2 tag in? No, it does not. Right? But it's also safer to launch it around a smaller field, etc. And so at our field, players have never experienced that ever. And so when they start getting used at like larger events and stuff, it is going to be an app, like, I hate the expression, but in this case, it literally applies, a game changer. It will change the way that the game is played, because you now have this ability to throw a grenade at a much larger distance. So that's one thing. And then the fact that the Flamingo grenades are so inexpensive, that means that they're going to be a lot more ubiquitous. There's going to be players who never would have had the money to buy like an ASG Storm, which is like, $150 Canadian, let's call it, something like that, 100%. Who now can say, yeah, you know what, I'll spend $50 and get a Flamingo throwing grenade, which means you're going to have a lot more grenades, which means that's something you're going to have to be concerned about, which never would have been before. So I think that's the next big thing in our community, is how ubiquitous grenades are about to become, and how that's going to really change the game for a lot of players. I can count the number of times on one hand that I've been killed by a grenade playing airsoft the last 20 years, right?
Completely valid.
And I fully expect that number to double this year, right? So I think for me, that's a big. And then from a community, like, broader standpoint, it's going to be milsim, more like more not to say real milsim, but games that are bringing milsim elements like the people in our community have never experienced by virtue of getting access to different fields, which I'm working very hard on, and we'll see if that materializes. Yeah,
I think that's valid. And when you had like Bo Stewart on the podcast at one point, I think you remember he talked a lot about how unsafe tag-ins could particularly be. For example, I don't want to take one to the temple because I feel like that would make me lose my like pilot qualification because of the potential damage that could do. He also said, I think I may be remembering it wrong, but he was also like, okay, great. Your tag-in can launch around 300 feet. How good's your arm? And I really like that because that can talk a lot about consistency and whatnot. I didn't know that was how unavailable pyro was, sort of in your neck of the woods. I'm fortunate in the fact that being military, it's very easy to get professional accounts with different people. I'm an older gay professional user for reasons other than airsoft, but able to get their products for airsoft if I so desired. Haven't done a whole lot of that yet, just because I don't think it's necessarily useful in our neck of the woods. And also, Wyoming is typically very dry and catches on fire very easily. So
yeah, that's a legit problem.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I think with the tag-ins, like people don't realize, but like a CO2 tag-in, operating pressure for that is close to 1500 psi.
Incredible,
right?
Yes,
right.
People don't realize
and like the 40 max shells that Tornado launches, like the maximum operating pressure of that before the O-rings break is just under 300 psi. So black gas is somewhere around 200 psi. Correct. So I have an experiment coming up where I ordered like a CO2 charger that has a regulator on it, so I could regulate the CO2 pressure to just under 300 psi and use CO2 in it just to see what the maximum range you can get from those shells. But there's a vast difference between launching one of those at 300 psi and 5 times that pressure, and then if you accidentally hit someone or something like that, like the risk is very different. Correct. Right? So yeah.
Absolutely. That's incredible.
So we're going to be playing around with that and seeing how we can incorporate it safely into our events, because we don't have vehicles. So like, what are you going to throw that at? Well, it could be buildings. You could be destroying buildings. Like, and how would that work? And so that's going to be some new game mechanics for our community. And I'm really looking forward to what happens. And just launching stuff out of a underslung grenade launcher is going to be awesome.
Absolutely. So, I'm not denying you in that one. I could very much easily talk about how like the next big thing that I think in my neck of the woods, and I also think for the entire airsoft community in general, is drones, especially with how commonplace they've become and how good their ISR capabilities are. But you know what? I'll put the ball back in your court, and if you ever want to have me back on for another...
I was just going to say, I would like to have you back on, and we'll talk about drones. Pick, thank you so much for joining us. It was a treat. I can't wait to talk to you again in future about some other projects that we were discussing. So guys, again, Pick is one of our Discord community members. If you want to have chats with him, make sure you're in the community chatting with us. It's a great place to be. Thank you so much for listening. That's all we've got for you this week. Take care.
Love to.